Okay, first I'm going to talk about some of the things, pathogenesis of Parkinson's, but meaning some of, how does Parkinson's happen, do we think, in some cases, because it relates to the gut and the microbiome. And then I'll talk about what the microbiome is specifically. Then we'll talk about constipation, which is just a problem unto itself in Parkinson's. And then I'll discuss a clinical trial we're doing at UCSF regarding the microbiome, and also some other clinical trials that we're doing too, but that don't have anything to do with the microbiome. There's something called alpha-synuclein. So I'm going to try to balance this talk a little bit, because there's going to be a little bit of sciencey stuff, because that's a lot of what this microbiome discussion is about, but this is just basic. Alpha-synuclein is a protein that's in the brain, and it's thought that it basically, in Parkinson's disease, it starts forming abnormal clumps and aggregations in the neurons. And so that this little brown dot you see here is an aggregation of this protein that usually is just floating around and doing its job in the cells, but in Parkinson's it starts to form these things called Lewy bodies, which are these aggregates of alpha-synuclein, which is itself a normal protein. We're not 100% clear on how does it go from being normal to forming clumps, and why does that happen in Parkinson's, but at any rate, it's something that has been seen for a long time in pathology and autopsies. Just a sort of quick second point, in the course of Parkinson's disease, a lot of people have several symptoms that predate the movement disorder part by up to decades. So something like constipation, which is here on the far left, may occur in some people up to 20 years before they ever get a tremor or ever have any of the symptoms that eventually lead them to getting diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I don't know if my mouse pointer is visible on the screen, but so this graph is kind of just a cartoon of really the progression of symptoms in an average sort of population way. It's not necessarily this way for everybody, but the middle of the graph is time 0, which is when you have some movement symptoms and get diagnosed. And to the left of that, up to 10 years before, people start having some of the dream enactment symptoms, and up to 20 years before, there can be some of the constipation that crops up. And also sort of in there as well is decreased sense of smell. So I'm just going to highlight those three because they have something to do with the gut. And this is just a useful graph if any of you want to do a sort of a screen grab, because it's just kind of an important one, thinking about all of the symptoms and just the whole picture of Parkinson's disease. Not necessarily everything for everybody, but it's one I use often. So there's something called the Brock hypothesis in Parkinson's, which basically says that these abnormal alpha-synuclein aggregations seem to come up from the gut. Now, so it's kind of a, about 20-year-old theory. Brock was a pathologist and found that when you do autopsies and look under a microscope for alpha-synuclein, you can see that there seemed to be these Lewy bodies, the alpha-synuclein things that are characteristic of Parkinson's, in the nervous system of the gut. So around our stomach and around our intestines, there's around the whole thing, kind of everywhere, is a fine pair of layers of neurons that basically we call sort of the gut, the brain of the gut, or the enteric nervous system. And what Brock found was that you could see these Lewy bodies, which are kind of sort of characteristic of Parkinson's disease. You could see them in the gut neurons as well. And as a matter of fact, there seemed to be kind of a ladder-like progression of these abnormalities, the more advanced people's symptoms were. So this may be a tad busy, but I'll just, to make it simple, the idea is that this may maybe start in the gut in some cases. It's a little bit it's less proven now, but it seems that in some cases it starts in the gut with this abnormal protein forming Lewy bodies, and may kind of climb up the gut, up from the gut via one of the nerves we have called the vagus nerve that kind of goes all the way up to the brain, the brain stem, and it maybe seeds from there. So if you see on the left here, the idea with this theory is that it kind of these Lewy bodies kind of start to work their way up the brainstem and eventually get to the movement parts of the brain, which are kind of in the middle here, the little red in the middle brain here. But one thing about this theory that is kind of attractive is that it explains a lot of why constipation comes really early, because it's coming from the neurons of the gut itself. They're having a problem first. So explaining maybe why this is something that can be seen up to 20 years ago, or 20 years before any movement problems. And then as the Lewy bodies kind of work their way up the brainstem, it explains a lot of the other symptoms that people seem to get in sequence. So dream enactment comes from a problem in the brainstem. There's a little nucleus of cells there that is supposed to shut off your movement when you're dreaming. That starts to get a little bit hurt. And so that's, people may start having dream enactment even before they ever get any movement symptoms. And basically there's a lot of little, the brainstem does a million different things, but actually the idea that it's climbing up from the bottom, the problem, fits a lot of how the symptoms seem to unfold in people with Parkinson's in time. There are other ways to get Parkinson's. There's genetic ways, there's all kinds of other things, but this is one sort of a big leading sort of theory for maybe a majority or some group of people that's been disputed. Not that it's incorrect, but that it doesn't apply to absolutely everyone. This is a picture of the same thing, but it's a pretty, this is the classic picture from Brock themselves, and they kind of show, same thing. Basically, things climb up, and when things get very advanced, the Lewy bodies have sort of climbed all the way up to the cortex of the brain, the outside, which is where we do our thinking and sort of our advanced cognitive functions. So that's why very late in Parkinson's disease, people can have some cognitive issues. Although it tends not to be memory problems, it tends to be executive planning and multitasking dysfunction, which is kind of in the front of the brain as this, and it kind of follows a little same pattern. But anyways, this is just a background. And so the vagus nerve I mentioned, which is thought to be sort of, in this theory, the route from the gut to the brain, is one of a very important nerve, a cranial nerve that basically, it does a lot of things, but it goes from the brain stem, and on its way down, it supplies a lot of sensation things in the throat and also the voice box. So the vagus nerve carries the things that control your larynx. Has nothing to do with why people with Parkinson's get trouble, soft voices. But anyways, the vagus nerve continues down, and basically it's the main communication between the brain and your gut brain. And it, helps your stomach control how much acid do I release? Is that a tasty looking meal there? Should I start secreting gastric juices? Things like that. And it also controls how fast your intestines are moving, which is kind of, for example, why maybe when somebody has to give a speech and they're nervous, they might get butterflies in their stomach or have to have a big bowel movement or something. It's coming from the vagus nerve. Or why certain medications or certain states of, when people are resting and relaxing, the gut moves faster. So the vagus nerve, so the gut brain can operate totally on its own, but the vagus nerve is like an emissary kind of from the main brain, kind of giving some updates and in a sense controlling the gut a little. And so this connection between Parkinson's and the vagus nerve, there's been two kind of interesting things that why people also thought that Parkinson's may come from the gut. One of them is that I believe I think it was the Netherlands or one country in Europe where they just have a nationalized health system and a lot of data. They found that people who had their appendix removed just for whatever reason during life, whether they had an infection or something like that, those people had lower rates of Parkinson's disease later in life than average. And they had thousands of people because it was a nationalized health thing. So there was enough people where they could sort of say that there's a real correlation there. We don't know why, but kind of going along with this theory that maybe something about this is coming from the gut, and the appendix is holding a bunch of bacteria there, so maybe there's something to that. The other one is that some people who have really bad acid reflux, one thing you can do to kind of reduce acid reflux is cut the little branches of the vagus nerve that are just before they get into go to the stomach, where they tell the stomach, make acid. So it's not done that much anymore, but they've also seen that but people who've had that procedure where they cut the vagus nerve, kind of lower down, they also have lower incidence of Parkinson's disease. These are not like dramatic, but it just shows that there's something going on. It's not something that anybody would do like to prevent Parkinson's disease, because it's still, a fraction of a percent for either case, but these are things that have been observed, and it makes people wonder, this is coming from the stomach or the gut, and what can we do to maybe stop it there or address it there? Any questions right at this point? And I can't see everybody, so if you just want to unmute and ask it, go for it. Okay. But like I said, this is kind of it doesn't seem to be 100% of the story. There's other autopsy things where they find the Lewy bodies all wherever in the brain, but don't see any in the gut. So there's an idea that there's many ways it starts. One of the others is via the nose, which is one route that things can get into the brain, because the nose actually has nerve cells that are out there touching the world. So they're kind of, that's the only place in your body where nerves are actually contacting the air. So it's another thought that maybe some kind of pathogen or bug or something, whether it's in the stomach or maybe in some cases the nose, that's the way it gets in and starts causing this problem and slowly spreading through the brain. But at any rate, so it's, so this isn't 100% like proven, but it seems to be the case in many instances of Parkinson's. So changing gears a little bit, now separately speaking, the microbiome, what it's sort of defined as is just the society of bacteria in your intestines, most of which are in the large intestine. So you have the small intestine kind of from the end of the stomach all the way kind of into your lower belly. Then you have the large intestine, which is the colon, aka the colon. But basically, the microbiome is all of the various species of bacteria that are in your intestines, and there's a lot of them. There's over 1,000 different species, and about a whole kilogram of bacteria, 10 to 100 trillion cells. People like to say that it's more cells than we have in our own cells of our body. There's more bacteria in our intestine than there are cells of our own bodies. And the microbiome, it depends on your family. It's thought that people get their first dose of bacteria from when they're being born. If they have a vaginal delivery, they kind of, it's just, our intestines are made to be colonized by bacteria. And it depends on your diet and exercise and states of illness. But it tends to be the case that people in the same household tend to have the same bacteria in their intestines. Part of it's because the bacteria are everywhere and you end up eating them. It's kind of gross, but it's, they get on you somehow when you live with somebody, so people tend to share the same microbiome. But we do know that the bacteria that are in your gut, they help digestion. They can either help or hurt digestion. So depending on which ones they are, they can be, but they definitely do things to break down certain things that your body is not able to break down. And they kind of make them into smaller things that then your body can absorb. So they aid in getting all of the energy you can out of food. And they are known to be important in the function of the immune system. Certain bacteria, if there's too many of them in the gut, or something I'm sure some of you have heard, like C. diff, there are some bacteria basically that are bad. They're pathogens like cholera and salmonella and things that can cause you harm. But the good bacteria that are there, the thousands of species that are there, play a role in protecting you from the bad guys, because they've already sort of set up shop and there's no room for the bad guys as long as everything is working smoothly. Then there's this other idea of the microbiome gut-brain axis, so that there's actually something that the bacteria in your gut are doing that do influence your brain directly. Some of it is thought to be, and they've shown this with mice and things like that, where, some mice, they clean out their bacteria and they behave differently when they're doing little maze tests and things like that. Some of that is thought to be due to what the bacteria do in breaking down certain substances that you eat that may be precursors to neurotransmitters. And, when you eat food, there's thousands of different chemicals that are in food, like normal, in a plant or anything. And a lot of, your body uses them for thousands of different things and breaks them down. And there's a lot of biochemistry going on. And so some bacteria, we don't know exactly which yet, but are kind of involved in making some things that do influence the brain's function, whether it's just helping you get certain nutrients that you need to make neurotransmitters or et cetera. We're not 100% sure yet, but it has been shown that mice behave differently if you change their microbiome. And so this is kind of just a rehash of what I said, but like I mentioned, so besides the immune stuff and the maintaining sort of the integrity of your gut, so it's not leaky kind of, or you're not too prone to infection, it's also important for helping the normal movement of the muscles of your intestine, which are smooth muscles that kind of, squeeze in a ring and push things down, same way your esophagus does. And yeah, and I already sort of described this, the gut-brain axis. Yes. Somebody had a question, I heard something. Okay. And there have been studies that show that the microbiome in people with Parkinson's is different than people without Parkinson's. And it kind of varies a bit, but this, like for instance, this graph here is talking about, it's illustrating like one specific species of bacteria, Prevotella, and it's just showing how in the, it's less than, well under 20%, very little in people with Parkinson's in terms of its abundance in their gut versus people without Parkinson's. They seem to have more of this bacteria. But we don't know chicken or egg, whether that's the, we actually think it's probably that this is a after effect of having Parkinson's. It changes the gut composition rather than this being the cause of it. Especially because people with Parkinson's take certain types of medications, and there's also, constipation that itself is common to Parkinson's disease. And that's mostly due to the actual muscles of the intestines. That may just change the makeup of the bacteria by itself. So we're mainly leaning to the fact that this is not a cause, but it's more of an effect of Parkinson's, that the bacteria are different. Another factor that kind of plays into the study that the clinical trial that I'll talk about in a second that we have open, is that the bacteria, different species of the bacteria, may have a role in helping you or hurting you in the absorption of the Parkinson's medications, like the Sinemet, carbidopa, levodopa, or Rytari, et cetera. Because they do, levodopa is a fairly simple substance, and the bacteria have kind of a huge toolkit of enzymes to break things down, and so it is sort of, we do know that some of the medications, when they get to your gut, the bacteria are going to break it down too, and it sort of depends on what do they change it to. Do they change it to something you can absorb that's useful to you, or do they just ruin it for you? So really what the bacteria are doing in your gut matters for medication absorption as well. And this is just kind of a flashy cartoon, but basically kind of covering sort of what I said before, that, the thinking being that the relationship between Parkinson's and your gut, there can be a couple things. There can be the inflammation in the gut, perhaps, due to, as yet, we're not sure which bacteria, but if the gut's inflamed, it may make it a little bit less tight, kind of, so it can be a little bit leaky and maybe let some outside substances from the environment, maybe toxins or whatever, actually get more into your blood if the gut is inflamed and not kind of sealing things as tight as you would like. There's the altered microbiome, maybe that it, has something to do, but we're not sure yet. This graph is basically just like what we're theorizing at the moment in terms of the connections. And the Brock theory that I mentioned, like maybe there's some pathogen that's making its way up from the gut to the brain, and that's what the gut has to do. And even H. pylori, which is a bacteria that is best known for its work in acid reflux. It's kind of one of the most common causes of acid reflux, but it's actually an infection of the stomach, but it makes you have acid. So, if you think that's something that you might have, it's easy to test. Primary care doctor, they have a breath test for it, but a brief course of antibiotics can cure lifelong acid reflux for some people. But that's a side note. But like I said, all of these connections are kind of still, we're not sure. So basically work in progress on this front. This is a clinical trial we have going on at UCSF. Because we don't know, though, for sure that there's no connection. And so what this trial is, it's called the MicroPD trial. And what we're doing is basically, I'm sure you're all familiar with, let me just show a quick graph here with motor fluctuations, which is, that effect of the carbidopa-levodopa where it kicks in, then it wears off, and then it kicks in and it wears off. And which can get to be more of a problem later on in disease, like your window of how much it works, like how many hours it works, gets narrower. And so one of the theories, or what this study we're doing is looking at, is whether the microbiome has at least some effect on that. We think that those ups and downs are just a part of what's going on in the brain and the levodopa. But anyways, for what this study does is it takes, they're recruiting about 80 people, and for half of them, they're going to give a antibiotic that only works in the intestines. Like it doesn't get absorbed into your body, it just stays there. But it kind of is thought to, and it's been used for years in other conditions, more infectious, problematic conditions. But this is a medication that's thought to kind of clean out, to kill a lot of the bacteria, simplify things in the intestine. And with, taking it for 2 weeks, and then seeing if it has an influence on the ups and downs and your motor symptoms related to the medication. So seeing like how much does the bacteria influence your absorption of the levodopa. So, and it's entirely remote. And I'll come back to this later, but I just kind of wanted to mention it here. But so this is the sort of stage where I was still figuring out whether there's a connection that we can do something about. But this is kind of one of the first tries of treatment to see, can we help absorption? Can we maybe make the fluctuations of movement symptoms, the ups and downs, better? And the medication rifaximin has been used for a long time. And like I said, it doesn't get absorbed in the body. It doesn't really have much in the way of side effects, except for it may cause like GI upset for some people, but it's pretty well tolerated. But obviously half of people will be placebo. But this is an important study to sort of see what really is there to the connection between the bacteria in the gut and Parkinson's symptoms. Because we don't have much more to sort of say about the microbiome and Parkinson's in terms of things to do yet, we don't, have it. We're still researching it, and this study is one of the things we're doing. There's not any clear recommendations or proven ones about like you should do this for your microbiome or you should eat this or that in relation to the Parkinson's symptoms themselves. So, but next I'll talk about just constipation in Parkinson's disease, which is, for a lot of people, the most annoying symptom other than the movement stuff in Parkinson's. But basically, it's a problem with those. I mentioned the brain, the nervous system of the gut, the one that kind of surrounds. It's kind of embedded in the walls of the entire the gastrointestinal system, along the stomach and intestines and colon, and along with the theory that in some cases the disease may start there. But basically, and started a long time before, but it's main way to conceptualize it though is that in the colon, where after you've digested most of your food and it's gone through the small intestine, gotten most of the nutrients and medications absorbed, the squeezing peristalsis action of the intestinal and colon walls is not as rigorous as it used to be, so it doesn't move as avidly. So part of it's a problem in the sort of nervous system net around the gut, but also part of it is the connection between the autonomic nervous system, like our fight or flight nervous system. Like I mentioned, if you have something nerve-wracking, it'll make you get butterflies or need to go to the bathroom. So some of the normal communication that the brain does, like time to, that may sort of inspire some of the movement or go now or timing of having bowel movements, that connection is a little bit disrupted too. But anyways, it manifests mainly for people as either not having a bowel movement as frequently as you used to. So, not going every day, but now going every 2 days, 3 days, or some longer, in which case obviously it becomes quite uncomfortable. But even if you have a bowel movement every day, it also kind of counts as constipation if it takes way too long to have a bowel movement and you're getting basically annoyed with how long you have to sit there. And the other is if you do have a bowel movement, but you really feel like you didn't get it all out. Those are kind of the main three sort of ways that this constipation shows up in Parkinson's. And it's more or less all because it's just not the muscles in the intestine aren't pushing enough and as frequently. So plus the typo there, but the sort of the main, I'll go to this actually first, but so if it's mild, the most important easy things are to make sure you're drinking enough liquid, aiming for 6 to 8 glasses of liquid a day, which can also help with lightheadedness, which some people in later Parkinson's may experience. And I know that is itself a double-edged sword, because having to pee more can be a problem, even more annoying problem in and of itself in Parkinson's. So we tell you to, drink more to prevent constipation, but then you have to go to the bathroom 20 times a day. And but basically the idea is, first start with more fluids. Some of the things of keeping a schedule of when you go to the bathroom. Although I find that most people have a schedule anyways, even though they don't, put it on their daily to-dos. Even if there's constipation, it tends to still be more or less at the same time. Eating more foods with just natural fiber, prunes, 4 to 5 prunes a day, cut in half, or plenty of salad, spinach, things like that, quinoa, oats. Eating meals regularly at the same time every day, just because to keep things in rhythm. And exercise is important, because since the gut isn't pushing things along as well on its own, you want to sort of engage gravity, and whether even if it's just by walking, but the jostling around actually helps move things down. Laying in bed is the worst for constipation. Even the 20-year-old who often who are in the hospital for some reason, if they lay down for 4 days, will get constipated. So being up and active is important to help sort of take advantage of gravity and get things moving down. Now, on fiber though, there is a little bit of a nuance there, because if you're drinking plenty of fluid, you're eating a good normal diet, exercising, and still have constipation, what we usually go to is recommending something like Senna or Dulcolax, which is bisacodyl, and these are both what are called bowel stimulants. So Senna is a plant-based thing, and when you eat it, and when you both of them about 12 hours later, once they kind of reach your large intestine, they stimulate the muscles of the large intestine to move. That's basically what those drugs do. So kind of and they don't get absorbed significantly into your blood. But once they reach your large intestine, they make the muscles work a little bit more.
Thank you very much.